and welcome to the My N.C. from A to Z, Bring Your Own Black Stories virtual program. My name is Kima Lassiter, and I am the Arts and Outreach Coordinator of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. We are very excited that you all have joined us today and hope that you will be inspired to share your own stories with your loved ones and friends after watching this event. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, the State Library of North Carolina, the North Carolina Historical Publications Office, and the Stanford L. Warren Branch Library in Durham, North Carolina. Now, just for a little background information before we get started, let's talk about what is My N.C. from A to Z. My N.C. from A to Z, written by Michelle Lanier and illustrated by Dare Coulter, is a children's board book that celebrates the pride of place, creates connection to North Carolina's rich African-American heritage, and teaches children about human equality and social justice. Today, we are honored to have its author, Michelle Lanier, share a special reading of the book for our viewers. Outside of being a phenomenal author, Michelle is also a scholar, oral historian, filmmaker, museum professional, and folklorist. Her deep roots in what she calls Afro-Carolina inspired her to successfully advocate for legislation creating the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, which she led as its founding executive director. In 2018, Michelle became the first African-American director of North Carolina's Division of State Historic Sites in the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Michelle also has a passion for teaching, particularly at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University, where she has served as a faculty member for 2 decades. Again, I am honored that Michelle is here today for you all to hear her vision of My N.C. from A to Z. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Kima. Thank you, African American Heritage Commission team. I'm so glad to be here, and I am so excited to read My N.C. from A to Z, this board book for children of all ages. It is a sunny day in North Carolina, so there's going to be some light that shines on this beautiful book, but I'm going to read through it and share as many of the images as possible. So we're going to start with A. A is for Anna Julia Cooper and Abraham Galloway, both born in North Carolina, and both seekers of freedom. And what's really exciting to me is there's a whole companion guide where people can learn all about each and every one of these letters in depth. And that is something that I'm very excited about. B is for Black Wall Street in Durham. You can see that it was born out of the minds of Black men and women. C is for Charlotte Hawkins Brown. D is for Dismal Swamp, the story of Black people hiding in the swamp and creating their own communities, even as they lived in the shadow of slavery, something called a maroon community. E is for Ella Baker, one of the mothers of the civil rights movement. F is for Freedom Hill, also known as Princeville, North Carolina, oldest incorporated all-Black town in the country. G is for George Henry White, very important congressman from North Carolina, who said, "Phoenix like the Black man will rise again," men and women and children. H is for HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. North Carolina is home to the most 4-year HBCUs of any state in the nation. I is for ice cream. We've talked a lot about I is for ice cream being what the dream of Black joy looks like as a result of resistance. J This is inside a young person's room with a lot of commemorative images. So J is for Michael Jordan and Harriet Jacobs and John Chavis. K. K is for Sarah Keyes. She too stood up against oppression and refused to be segregated. L is for Longleaf Pine. This shows the connection between Black labor and ecosystems. The Longleaf Pine, like this particular Black woodsman, also suffered at the hands of unchecked greed, but somehow the descendants of this man and the seedlings, the descendants of the Longleaf Pine that was almost eradicated, somehow they're still here to tell the story. M is for medicine. We're talking a lot about healing right now, healing of the mind, the body, the spirit, the soul of our nation. And for us, the tradition of medicine starts with the elders and the earth connected together to serve their communities, and then continues through the addition of technologies and compassion and education. North Carolina's first medical school of any kind was a Black medical school. It was Leonard Medical School, which was a part of Shaw University. N is for the renowned Nina Simone, who was unapologetic, complicated, outspoken, and loved her people and sought freedom with her voice, her song, her artistry, and could not be defined by genre. Came from Tryon, North Carolina, a little place in the Appalachian Mountains. O is for the Outer Banks. Out there on that water, there were islands populated by Black people, still are. And particularly after the Civil War, there was a community called Roanoke Island. The freedmen settlement there was one of several emancipation communities in North Carolina. P is for Pauli Murray, raised in Durham, North Carolina, also knew no bounds in terms of gender identity, racial identity, and fought for human rights all over the globe, from Ghana, West Africa, to Howard University, Yale University, and in the Episcopal Church, and wrote poetry while fighting for the rights of all people. Q. Q is for quiet and quilts and questions. A lot of times when we tell stories of Blackness, we don't necessarily lean into the sanctity and the comfort of Black home life, interiors that are rich with family legacies, stories, generations of love and gifts, kindness, affection. And so the quiet and the quilts and the questions are a nod to Black home life, and whatever that home life looks like, that there is love within Blackness. R is for Rosenwald Schools. And one of the things that's really exciting to me is that the teacher here is modeled after the director of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, Angela Thorpe. And Rosenwald Schools really could be called the Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald community, Black community schools, because Booker T. Washington had this idea. Julius Rosenwald, who was a Jewish philanthropist and the CEO of Sears and Roebuck, gave seed money, a little bit of money for each school. And it was the people in the communities who came together, building the schools, funding the rest of the money that was necessary for the schools, equipping the schools, teaching in the schools, sustaining and repairing the schools. There were mothers who would come home from domestic work and carry bricks in their aprons to build schools for their children. And North Carolina, just like we are the home to the most four-year HBCUs of any state in the nation. We also had the most Rosenwald schools of any state that had a Rosenwald school, approximately 800. And so S is for songs, and with song, there is also dance. And so we see Baba Chuck in his robes, and we see Deborah Austin dancing on point in her tutu, and we see the movement of revelers in a Sugar Shack moment. Sugar Shack based on a party that happened in Durham, North Carolina at the Durham Armory, painted by Ernie Barnes, who we're going to hear about again in a moment. But the musicians from our state, oh my Lord, we have John Coltrane, we have Roberta Flack, we have Thelonious Monk, we have the Carolina Chocolate Drops, we have Rhapsody, we have Ninth Wonder, we have J. Cole, we have Fantasia, we have Sister Lena Mae Perry, we have Shirley Caesar, we have, who am I leaving out? Clarence Avant, who is considered the father of Black music, Joe Thompson, the fiddler, and on and on. Maceo Parker, one of the founders of funk. Oh goodness, did I say Roberta Flack? We have so many musicians, Max Roach, so many musicians who went on to change the world. And of course, I've already called out Nina Simone, and you're gonna hear again about George Clinton in just a moment. Thomas Day was an artisan who was very successful before the Civil War. He was a free man of color. He was not enslaved. And his work was so sought after that even though it was illegal for free people of color to cross state lines, the North Carolina legislature passed a law allowing his wife to cross from Virginia to be with him. And much of his work still exists today. There's a huge collection at the North Carolina Museum of History, and his workshop still stands in Milton, North Carolina. U is for United States Colored Troops. There were over 6,000 Black men who fought for freedom and the union of this country. So when you talk about North Carolina in the Civil War, to say that our state was Confederate is an oversimplistic analysis. The government voted to secede, but the people of North Carolina had a multitude of perspectives. There were those enslaved, there were those who were Black in Union, there were those who were white in Union, there were those who didn't believe in war at all, who were conscientious objectors, and then there were those who played both sides because they wanted to see how this thing was going to play out. But there were over 6,000 Black men who fought with the Union from North Carolina, and 4,000 U.S. colored troops fought at the Second Battle of Fort Fisher in Wilmington, North Carolina. V is for visionary artists. So many renowned visual artists from North Carolina who are also African-American. John Biggers, Gastonia, Selma Burke from Mooresville, Minnie Evans from down near the water, near Wilmington and Brunswick County, Ernie Barnes, Durham, Romare Bearden, Charlotte. And these are artists who have changed the way the world understands who we are as human beings, and certainly the Black experience. W is for writers. So we have writers like Jackie Shelton Green, who is our poet laureate for the state of North Carolina, Charles Waddell Chestnut of Fayetteville, who is a distant relative, George Moses Horton, who was a poet. He was enslaved and sought to free himself partially through the sale of his love poetry, which he sold at the campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. X is for X-ray. This is the first Black X-ray technician in the state of North Carolina. Her name was Margaret Kennedy Goodwin. Not only did she make history as an X-ray technician, but she also was a part of a Black Wall Street family. She also went to Palmer Memorial Institute that was founded by Charlotte Hawkins Brown. So she is a connector to a multitude of these letters. Y is for you. All of you, every single one of you are connected to this history because you've heard these stories. And so now these stories are part of who you are. And lastly, Z is for zooming to the future in the mothership. This is George Clinton. He is from Kannapolis, North Carolina. And we are living in the future, but we're also creating the future. And we are also the dreams, the future dreams of all of these souls that have gone on to another dimension. And with that mothership, we can only imagine where we will go next. So that is my N.C. from A to Z.
Thank you, Michelle, for that deep dive into My N.C. from A to Z. What you have shared is a true testament that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that we have to influence, teach, and to inspire others. It forges connections among people and between people and ideas. And then within African American communities in particular, our stories convey the culture, history, and values that unite our people. And to quote journalist and author Andrea Collier, it is our roots and our wings. Now, I would like to introduce another phenomenal woman joining us today, Omisade Burney-Scott. Omnishade is a Black Southern seventh generation Native North Carolinian feminist, mother, and healer. She has spent the better part of the past 25 years of her life focused on the liberation of marginalized people, beginning with her own community through advocacy work, philanthropy, community organizing, and culture work. She is the creator and curator of the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, a multimedia project seeking to curate and share the stories and realities of Black women and femmes over 50. This project is a direct result of her finding herself and her peers living at the intersection of social justice movement work, creative healer identities, and aging. She has chosen to use this medium of storytelling to disrupt the erasure of Black women's voices as they age. Omnishade is a member of the 1999-2001 class of the William C. Friday Fellows for Human Relations, a 2003 Southeastern Council on Foundations Hall Fellow, and a founding member of NGAAP, the next generation of African American philanthropy. She has served on various nonprofit boards, including Stone Circles, Fund for Southern Communities, Spirit House, Village of Wisdom, Working Films, and The Beautiful Project. She is a 1989 graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, the proud mom of two sons, Che and Taj, and resides in North Carolina. And now I will pass it over to Michelle and Omishade.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Omishade. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Kima. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear the ways in which your life has been touched by stories, particularly of Blackness in this state.
Absolutely. I guess, the interesting thing for me around storytelling is I always think about how stories were woven so deliciously in my own family. And I think that you probably have a very similar experience as an Afro-Carolinian, like the way that we tell stories in our families keeps us alive. I had older parents. And so many of the stories that I heard growing up were about their upbringing and their childhood and their adventures when they left North Carolina to move to New York. Like many Black folk in that great migration, my family lived both in North Carolina and then in Washington, D.C., and also in Brooklyn and in Harlem. So there are all these stories around like this leaving home and going and living someplace else. But there are also stories of people whose names I know, who I feel like I knew them, but I really didn't, because they had been long gone and had passed on and were ancestors by the time the stories were relayed to me or my sister or other members of our family. And so I feel like I developed relationships with some people inside of my family because of the stories that were shared. I have a fairly large family. There are 16 granddaughters. My eldest sister is the oldest granddaughter. I'm number 15, and my younger sister is the 16th granddaughter. And so with all of these first cousins, you can imagine the stories that were told and shared over a generation. And I'm 53, and those stories still walk with me, as both my parents are ancestors now. And so I appreciate storytelling as a connector, storytelling as a means of time travel, and storytelling as a means of, you know, deep healing work that's possible when you share stories. Yeah.
I totally feel the depth of what you're saying. I've been talking to a dear friend of mine who, her mother would come and visit my grandmother. And they were both deeply just in sisterly love with each other. And they both were a part of the Great Migration story as well. So one of these women grew up in South Carolina, grandma grew up primarily in North Carolina, but they both ended up in Philadelphia. And then they both ended up, you know, carving out space back in the South in different ways. My grandmother's house in Columbia, South Carolina, is what I call an oasis space. But the center, the heartbeat of that for me was the kitchen table, was that kitchen space. That was the storytelling, you know, center. It was almost like the hearth, but there wasn't a fireplace in there, but it felt like there was. I remember sitting at my grandmother's table, Anne Grace Richardson Caution, with her 3 daughters, Cheryl and Margaret and Gail. And then we also had a whole bunch of granddaughters. She ultimately had 5 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And I remember particularly Fish Fry Fridays, this sense of connectedness and joy, celebrating, kind of getting through the week. And it was often maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday that we would hear more stories with that, like that cue, that quiet and quilts and questions. That was when that kind of energy was very much alive. And I remember hearing my grandmother talk about people starting schools. I remember that she was sent with one of her aunts to a rural part of the state as a companion, while that particular aunt helped to establish a one-room school. And while they were building the school and getting everything organized, they slept in what had been a chicken coop.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me, especially kind of given the time frame that I'm assuming that you're talking about. You know, my mom was born 1930 in Eastern North Carolina, and her father passed away when she was 4. And so for a period of time, my mom and my grandmother and my uncle Coley lived with different family members in Eastern North Carolina, and they slept in a variety of places until they landed back on their feet in a way that was more stable when she was 6 years old. And so if I close my eyes and listen to you talk about them going down to help build this school and where they had to sleep. And I imagine that they probably ate poke salad, and I imagine that they probably drank mullein tea. And I imagine, you know what I mean? Like, you can close your eyes and imagine what that must have been like for them, and what that felt like for them. And that's one of the reasons I love your book too. Like, it takes us across the state. And the different connections we have to the state, even though I'm an Eastern North Carolina girl, I love the way that you connect us to Western North Carolina. I love how you connect us to education and the arts and culture and organizing. And it makes me think about when I first moved to Durham. And when I first started working in Durham. Now, look, I'm gonna pick your brain, because I know we both have had long roots in Durham. Did you ever get food from the Green Candle?
I was never able to get food from the Green Candle, but I've heard so many stories about the Green Candle. It deeply pains me that I've never eaten it. Now, I've definitely eaten at the Chicken Hut, which is definitely a part of the Black experience of Durham, but tell about the Green Candle, because I wish I had been there.
So when I was talking about how you pulled up Black Wall Street,
Yes.
of course, Hayti Heritage area, and North Carolina Central University, it made me think about the Green Candle. So I started working in downtown Durham in 1995. And I would eat at a lot of different places. I used to eat at Talk of the Town because they used to serve lunch. Remember that? They used to serve lunch at Talk of the Town. I used to eat at the Palace International when they were located downtown. I still support them where they are in this location on Broad Street, but when they were downtown. I used to eat at the Bagel Dog, which is also, do you remember the Bagel Dog? It was a Black owner operated, they had veggie bagel dogs. But anyway, so my friends who I worked with, they said, listen, you need to eat at the Green Candle. And I was like, why? Because they knew I was from New Bern. They know that even in whatever iteration of my dietary goals, whether that was vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, whatever it was, they knew that I like down home cooking. And I always will. And they were like, you should eat at the Green Candle. This food is so good. It's like your mama cooked it. And I was like, okay, great. Now, what they didn't tell me, Michelle, is that there was a whole ritual involved with actually eating food at the Green Candle. They also didn't tell me that the owner of the Green Candle, Miss Allen, I think her name was Azona Allen. Now, Miss Allen did not play. Miss Allen was of that ilk of Black woman who was very clear about her business and very clear about what she needed from you to access her food. And when the food was gone, the food was gone. So I got it in my mind one day that I was going to go and get me whatever dish. I didn't know what was going to be prepared. So I go popping over to the Green Candle. It was in Phoenix Shopping Center at this point. At one point, it was on East Pettigrew Street. And then we know what happened with the Durham Freeway and how that divided the Black community. Yeah. But it was now in Phoenix Shopping Center. So I pop over there and I'm just standing there. And I'm just waiting for someone to acknowledge me. I'm waiting in line. And then I get to the front of the line and they're looking at me and I'm looking at them. And I realize there's a process. So I said, I would like to order. She said, no. Did you call your order in? I was like, no, ma'am. Said, next, and went right on around me. So I get back to the office and I say to my coworker, I said, what's the deal? I went and I stood in line for like 20 minutes, got to the front of the line, and she was like, what's your order? And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So you had to call the Green Candle the morning of to find out what she was preparing for that day. Because it was not like this kind of like a la carte menu where you could order a whole lot of different things. If it was chicken fried steak, it was chicken fried steak. If it was meatloaf, it was meatloaf. If it was chicken and dumplings, it was chicken and dumplings. That's it. And you call in your order between like 10 and 11. If you called it 11:01, she would pick up the phone and hang back up on you. So, wait, and you have to arrive in a window of time as well. And then even if you ordered your food, because you paid when you got there.
Yes.
You ordered your food and you got there and she was out of chicken and dumplings, well, then you were out of chicken and dumplings. And so I did finally find my way into the ritual of ordering and the ritual of arriving on time and the ritual of being able to bring a box lunch, styrofoam lunch plate back to the office. And it was great, but it was a whole process. And people talk a lot about her personality, a big personality, and how strict she was. And some people even called her mean. And I think, Michelle, if you are a Black person who had a business on Black Wall Street, a Black woman who owned a business for years, and to see that business disrupted and move from one place to another place to another place, to the point where you couldn't have people come and sit down like they used to when students would come to North Carolina Central and they knew they could go to the Green Candle and get food. I don't know why her disposition what it was, but I can understand why she might be strict.
Right. And there's also something really beautiful about saying that what I'm giving is it's not something that you can readily find very easily. I understand the value of what I'm providing. She also, I think, understood that part of the experience of Blackness is being sometimes disrupted from family. And some of the ways that we connect to that feeling of care is through food. It's like, I need some cornbread, or, there'll be times when I'll say, I need some fried fish because it's Friday, and there are places I'll go and get that. And then knowing who to call to ask, where can I get it? And there's something very fortifying about that. And I think about also the community energy around that. Like when you walk around communities like, Hayti, and I think about Black communities in New Bern, because there's several, or Princeville, or communities in Greensboro, and communities in Winston-Salem, or some of these rural communities that people don't think about that have really old, deep, rich African-American traditions and presence, like in Halifax County. And when you are around each other, what you'll hear are people being genealogists on the spot, where they're saying, oh, you're so-and-so's child. Oh, you're so-and-so's grandchild. Isn't that your cousin? I know where your people are buried. Or didn't you all used to live here? Didn't you all used to worship here? Didn't you used to go to school here? Didn't you used to have this business? I remember you also have this car. And so there are ways that kind of knowing yourself, knowing whose you are and from whence you come is connected to these communities, and so they are like these living archives.
Yeah.
And part of, I think, what I have wanted to do just in my daily practice and in the book itself is, how do you create touchstones for memory that serves us really well in the time of these outcries of Black Lives Matter. It's important, I think, to acknowledge the strategies of survival and the strategies of thriving that Black folks have been creating for hundreds of years. And also, I'm so deeply smug about the particular contribution of the North Carolina Black experience to the whole planet.
That's right.
Because there are people all over the planet.
We have to claim that there, I don't know if you noticed this over the last few years, there are people who will disparage the South as it relates to organizing, like what our organizing work looks like in real time, contemporarily, and they will give us a nod historically, but they'll disparage, and I'm like, don't disparage. I think it is important for us to understand the through line of our organizing, social justice, civil rights, history, and contemporary work. The work that we do right now is evidence in the ways that we address or redress what we see in terms of systemic oppression and how people are marginalized. And I love in the book how you do a reclaiming, because some people aren't aware, do a reclaiming of so many different types of people and be like, and this is their home. I want you to be clear about this is their home.
Yeah.
So the tentacles kind of are wide and far, like, and we can stretch ourselves all the way from Wilmington and the Outer Banks all the way to the mountains, and we can see how those things connect up. They're connected to us as well, and we will not allow it to be disregarded. One of my pet peeves in doing national social justice work is to have some folk talk trash, a little bit of trash, and we're like, no. What's probably a better approach, or a more accurate approach is, it's complex. everything's it's complex, it's nuanced. What is undeniable though is that it is grounded and is rooted in such powerful tradition.
Yeah.
And it cannot be invisibilized. It just can't.
Yeah. And the marginalization and the invisibilizing of Black women from the narrative of social justice is also something that doesn't stand up well
It doesn't.
in North Carolina. When we think about Sarah Keys, and W. Roundtree, and Polly Murray, and Ella Baker, and all of the
and our boo Anna Julia Cooper, who we love.
Julia Cooper, yes, and Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown, and and Nina Simone, and all of the Black girl children of Eastern North Carolina who were fighting. There's a story that Golden Franks tells about wanting to help some young people to gain access to the front entrance of the movie theater in Edenton, and it was the Black girl children. And I want to say this one last thing, and I know we have to wrap up, and we can go on and on forever. Is that the mothers of funk are from North Carolina. So when we think about funk music, George Clinton's mother is from North Carolina.
Betty Davis is from North Carolina, from Durham. We always forget about Betty Davis.
Please, yes.
She transformed Miles Davis's whole world.
Yes, Betty Davis, and not just funk, but a kind of like punk rock edge, rock and roll funk. Yeah, so it's so important. We could go on and on, but I'm so glad to share stories with you from your family to mine, and from these, parts of North Carolina that continue to feed us for this current moment. Because as our Afro Georgia brother said, the South still has something to say.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and I'm so grateful for this book. And the work that you do that is iterative and reminds us of our non-linear connections to each other.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Wow, thank you both so much, Michelle and Omishade. I'm speechless right now. I want to thank you for being open, for connecting with one another, for sharing your own stories about your experiences in North Carolina and within our Black communities, and letting folks know about those unknown hidden gems that we have here in North Carolina. And to our viewers, we want you to do the same with your own families. With the holiday seasons approaching, your family and friend gatherings might look a little different this year. But I encourage each of you to share your stories with one another during these times, virtually or safely in person, and then send them to us at the Commission. We'd love to share your stories through our website and through our other social media outlets. This concludes our program for today. For more information on My N.C. from A to Z, please visit our website at www.aahcnc.gov. And stay tuned for more information on our final installment of virtual programming in January of 2021, entitled My N.C. in My Backyard, which will highlight figures and stories in the book from Wilson and Kinston, North Carolina. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you in January. Be safe and take care.